In a small village tucked away on the outskirts of Bogota, Colombia, lived a woman named Maria. She wasn't rich or famous, but she was known in her community for being kind-hearted and hard-working. A single mother, Maria had poured all her energy into raising her daughter, who was the light of her life. Her daughter, Sophia, had grown up to become everything Maria could have hoped for: smart, brave, and determined. Sophia joined the army at a young age, driven by a desire to serve her country and make her mother proud. Maria often spent her evenings sitting by the window, gazing out at the distant mountains while clutching letters Sophia sent home. Each letter brought warmth to her heart, filled with stories of comradeship, discipline, and pride in serving their nation. For Maria, these letters were more than just words. They were proof that despite the hardships they faced as a family, they had done something right. Sophia was not just her child. She was her reason to wake up every morning with hope. But one day that hope shattered into pieces. It happened on an ordinary afternoon when the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the village. Maria was busy tending to her garden when she heard footsteps approaching her door. At first she thought nothing of it. Neighbors often dropped by unannounced. But then there was a knock. A firm, official-sounding knock. Her stomach tightened as she wiped her hands on her apron and hurried inside. When she opened the door, her blood ran cold. Standing before her were two soldiers, their faces grim and unreadable. One held a folded flag in his arms, its colors bright against the dullness of their uniforms. Before they even spoke, Maria felt it, a sinking feeling deep in her chest, like the world was crumbling beneath her feet. The taller soldier cleared his throat and began speaking in a voice heavy with regret. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "we regret to inform you that your daughter, Sofia Rodriguez, has been killed in action." The words hit Maria like a punch to the gut. She staggered backward, clutching the edge of the doorway for support. Killed? No, it couldn't be true. Not Sofia. Not her strong, fearless girl who always found a way through anything. The soldiers explained that Sofia's unit had come under fire during a routine patrol in a conflict zone. They fought bravely, they said, but Sofia didn't survive. Her injuries. As they handed over the folded flag, Maria barely registered their words. All she could hear was the deafening silence in her mind, broken only by the sound of her own sobs. She fell to her knees, clutching the flag to her chest as if holding on to it would somehow bring Sofia back. The days that followed were a blur of grief and disbelief. Friends and neighbors came to console her, bringing food and prayers, but none of it mattered. Maria moved through the motions like a ghost, attending the funeral with tears streaming down her face. She watched as Sofia's coffin was lowered into the ground, the finality of it all crushing her spirit. How could this happen? Why did it happen? But as the initial wave of shock began to subside, doubts crept into Maria's mind. Sofia was no ordinary soldier. She was sharp, resourceful, and always prepared. Could someone like her really fall victim to such a random tragedy? Maria replayed memories of Sofia's childhood, the way she'd climb trees higher than anyone else, the way she'd solve problems with clever solutions. Something about the official story didn't add up. One night, unable to sleep, Maria sat alone in her dimly lit kitchen. The house felt eerily quiet without Sofia's laughter filling its walls. Her gaze drifted to the framed photo on the wall, a picture of Sofia in her uniform, standing tall and confident. That image sparked something within her. What if Sofia wasn't really gone? What if the truth was hidden somewhere waiting to be uncovered? The thought consumed her. Maria knew she couldn't sit idly by, accepting what she'd been told without question. She needed answers, even if it meant taking matters into her own hands. And so, late one evening, armed with nothing but a shovel and sheer determination, Maria slipped out of her house and headed toward the cemetery where Sofia lay buried. The moonlight guided her path as she walked silently through the rows of graves, each marked with names etched in stone. Reaching Sofia's plot, Maria hesitated, for a moment staring at the freshly turned earth. Digging up her daughter's grave felt wrong. It went against every moral fiber in her body, but she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was terribly amiss. Taking a deep breath, Maria plunged the shovel into the ground. The soil was soft, making the task easier than she expected, but emotionally it was excruciating. With each thrust of the shovel, guilt swirled inside her. Was she betraying Sophia's memory? Or was she honoring it by seeking the truth? Tears streamed down her face as she worked tirelessly, driven by a mix of desperation and maternal instinct. Hours passed, and finally, the shovel struck wood. Maria froze, her heart pounding wildly. This was it, the moment of truth. Using a crowbar she'd brought along, she pried open the coffin lid, steeling herself for what lay inside. Her hands trembled as she pulled back the lid, and when she saw what, or rather who, was inside, she gasped in shock. It wasn't Sophia. Instead, lying there was a young man, barely out of his teens. His face was partially decomposed, but his dog tags bore a name that wasn't Sophia's. Maria stumbled backward, her mind racing. Who was this person? Why had they put him in Sophia's grave? And most importantly, where was Sophia? Standing amidst the darkness of the cemetery, Maria realized she was dealing with something far bigger and far darker than she'd ever imagined. Someone had lied to her, and now she was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Maria stood frozen in the cemetery, her mind struggling to make sense of what she had just uncovered. The young man lying in the coffin wasn't Sophia. It was someone else entirely, a stranger whose life had been stolen, just like hers had been, shattered. Maria's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the coffin, her heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the distant chirping of crickets. Her breath came in short gasps, and for a moment, she thought she might faint. But she couldn't afford to collapse, not now, not when there were still so many unanswered questions. Who was this boy? Why had they buried him in Sophia's place? And most importantly, where was her daughter? Maria's mind raced with possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. She felt anger bubbling up inside her, hot and fierce. Someone had lied. To her. Someone had deliberately deceived her, making her believe that her only child was dead. The weight of betrayal pressed down on her chest, but beneath it was something stronger. Determination. She wasn't going to stop until she found out the truth. As dawn approached, Maria quickly covered the grave again, careful not to leave any trace of her presence. She didn't know who was watching or what kind of people she was dealing with, but she knew she couldn't trust anyone. Not yet. Walking back home under the pale light of early morning, Maria replayed every detail of the past few days in her mind. The soldiers who delivered the news, the funeral, the official report. All of it seemed staged, calculated. Something about the entire situation felt off, and now she had proof. Back at her house, Maria sat at the kitchen table staring at the dog tags she had taken from the coffin. They belonged to a soldier named Diego Alvarez. His name meant nothing to her, but it was a clue, a starting point. Maria decided to visit the local military office the next day, pretending to seek closure about Sophia's death. If anyone could tell her more about Diego Alvarez, it would be them. The trip to the military office was nerve-wracking. Maria dressed simply, trying to look as unassuming as possible. As she walked through the gates, she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Soldiers moved briskly around her, their boots echoing against the concrete floors. Maria approached the reception desk and explained that she wanted information about her daughter's unit, the same unit Diego Alvarez supposedly belonged to. The clerk looked at her skeptically but eventually handed her a file containing basics, details about the mission during which Sophia was allegedly killed. Maria flipped through the pages carefully, absorbing every word. According to the report, the unit had been ambushed by insurgents during a routine patrol. Several soldiers died, including Sophia. But something caught Maria's eye, a discrepancy in the timeline. The report claimed the attack happened late, at night, but Sophia's letters home mentioned that patrols usually ended before sunset, How could an ambush occur if they weren't even out in the field? Doubts continued to pile up, but Maria needed more concrete evidence. Over the next few days, she scoured the village, discreetly asking questions. Most people were too afraid to talk, fearing retaliation from authorities. But one evening, while sitting alone at the local cafe, she struck gold. A man seated nearby recognized her and cautiously approached. He introduced himself as a former soldier who had served briefly with Sophia's unit. His voice was low, almost a whisper as he shared fragments of information. He told Maria that rumors had circulated after the ambush, whispers of secret operations, missing comrades, and high-ranking officials covering their tracks. At first, Maria dismissed it as idle gossip, but then the man dropped a bombshell. "I heard your daughter wasn't among the dead," he said hesitantly. "Some say she was taken away by men in black uniforms shortly after the firefight." Maria's heart skipped a beat. Taken away? What did that mean? Was Sophia still alive? The man wouldn't, or couldn't, say more, but his words ignited a fire within Maria. If Sophia wasn't dead, then she was somewhere, possibly in danger. Maria realized she couldn't tackle this alone. She needed help. But whom could she trust? That night, Maria confided in Father Luis, the local priest and a close family friend. Father Luis had known Sophia since she was a child and had always been a pillar of support for Maria. Sitting in the quiet confines of the church, Maria poured out everything: the graveyard discovery, the suspicious report, and the soldier's cryptic warning. Father Luis listened intently, his brow furrowed with concern. "This is bigger than you think," he said finally. "You're dealing with powerful people who won't hesitate to silence anyone who gets in their way. But you can't give up. We'll find a way to protect you and uncover the truth." Together, they devised a plan. Father Luis suggested reaching out to journalists and human rights activists who specialized in exposing corruption. Meanwhile, Maria would continue gathering whatever information she could, no matter how small or insignificant it seemed. Every clue mattered. Over the following weeks, Maria worked tirelessly, piecing together bits of information like a puzzle. She visited old friends of Sophia's, combed through newspaper archives, and even traveled to nearby towns to speak with families of other soldiers who had gone missing. Slow, coming into focus. Sophia hadn't been killed. She had uncovered illegal arms deals involving senior military officials. Instead of eliminating her outright, they staged her death and imprisoned her in a remote detention facility, ensuring no one would ever find her. Maria's resolve hardened. She wasn't just fighting for Sophia anymore, she was fighting for justice, for all the families who had been lied to and betrayed. With Father Luis's guidance, she located the facility where Sophia was being held, a heavily guarded compound nestled deep in the mountains. Breaking in seemed impossible, but Maria refused to let fear stop her. She had come too far to turn back now. One evening, as Maria prepared for the dangerous journey ahead, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought about Sophia as a little girl, running barefoot through the fields, laughing without a care in the world. She thought about the sacrifices they had made together, the dreams they had shared, and she thought about the promise she had made to herself long ago, to always protect her daughter, no matter what. With renewed determination, Maria packed a small bag with essentials and set out under the cover of darkness. The road to the mountains was treacherous, winding through dense forests and rocky terrain. But Maria pressed on, driven by hope and fueled by love. She didn't know what awaited her at the facility, but she was ready to face it head-on. Time she reached the base of the mountain, exhaustion weighed heavily on her body, but her spirit remained unbroken. Looking up at the towering peaks, Maria whispered a silent prayer. Tomorrow, she would confront the people who had taken her daughter and stolen her peace. Tomorrow, she would fight for the truth and for Sophia. Maria stood at the edge of the dense forest, staring up at the mountain looming ahead. The facility where Sophia was being held wasn't just any ordinary building. It was a fortress, hidden deep in the wilderness and surrounded by high walls, topped with barbed wire. Getting inside wouldn't be easy, but Maria didn't have time to dwell on fear or doubt. Every second counted, and she knew that if she hesitated now, she might lose her chance forever. With Father Luis's help, Maria had gathered as much information as possible about the compound. They had spoken to former soldiers who had been stationed nearby, piecing together details about its layout, security measures, and daily routines. One man, an ex-guard who claimed to have worked there briefly, described how the facility operated. Like a shadowy labyrinth, prisoners were kept in isolated cells, their voices silenced behind thick steel doors. It sounded grim, but it gave Maria a glimmer of hope. If Sophia was still alive, she would find her. She had to. As dawn broke over the horizon, Maria began her ascent into the mountains. The air grew colder with each step, and the path became steeper and more treacherous. Her legs ached and her breath came in ragged gasps, but she pushed forward, clutching a small bag slung over her shoulder. Inside were basic supplies: water, a flashlight, and a knife. Father Luis had insisted she carry for protection. "You don't know what you'll face," he had warned her. "Be smart, but don't let fear stop you." By midday, Maria reached a vantage point overlooking the facility. From her position among the trees, she could see the sprawling complex. Below, a maze of concrete buildings surrounded by watchtowers manned by armed guards. Heavy gates blocked the entrance, and patrol vehicles circled the perimeter like predators marking their territory. Observing the scene, Maria felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just a detention center. It was a prison designed to keep people locked away from the world, and perhaps even erase them entirely. Instead of charging in blindly, Maria decided to wait until nightfall. Darkness would give her some cover, making it harder for the guards to spot her movements. Settling into a makeshift hiding spot beneath a cluster of bushes, she ate a few bites of stale bread and sipped water sparingly. Her mind raced with plans and scenarios, but one thought remained constant. Sophia was somewhere inside those walls, and she needed her mother. As dusk fell, the facility lit up with harsh floodlights, casting long shadows across the grounds. Maria watched carefully, memorizing the patterns of the patrols. The guards moved methodically, their rifles slung over their shoulders as they scanned the area. They seemed alert but predictable, sticking to specific routes without straying too far. That predictability might work in Maria's favor. When the clock struck midnight, Maria made her move. Clutching the knife tightly in her hand, she crept down the slope, staying low to avoid detection. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared it might give her away, but she forced herself to focus. Step by step, she inched closer to the outer fence. Up close, the barrier looked even more imposing, tall and electrified, with signs warning of lethal voltage. But Maria had prepared for this. Earlier that day, she had scouted the area and found a weak spot where the wiring appeared frayed. Now crouching in the shadows, she used the knife to cut through the damaged section, creating a small opening just wide enough for her to slip through. Once inside, Maria pressed herself against the cold metal wall of the nearest building, catching her breath. The air smelled of damp earth and rust, and the hum of electricity buzzed faintly in the background. Every sound seemed amplified: the crunch of gravel underfoot, the distant bark of a dog, the occasional shout from a guard. She had to stay calm, stay quiet. One wrong move and everything would fall apart. The first challenge came quickly. A pair of guards rounded the corner, their boots echoing ominously against the pavement. Maria ducked into a narrow alcove, holding her breath as they passed mere inches away. Their conversation drifted back to her, snippets of laughter and casual banter. They weren't expecting anyone to breach the facility tonight, which meant they weren't looking closely. Still, Maria couldn't afford to take chances. She waited until their voices faded before moving again. Navigating the compound required both patience and luck. Maria stuck to the shadows, avoiding open spaces and keeping an eye out for cameras mounted on poles. When she spotted a door slightly ajar, she slipped inside, finding herself in a dimly lit corridor. The walls were bare except for peeling paint, and the floor was stained with dirt and grime. It smelled of despair, a place where hope went to die. Maria moved cautiously, listening for any sign of life. Most of the rooms she passed were empty, their doors bolted shut. But then, halfway down the hallway, she heard something faint, a muffled cry. Her pulse quickened. Following the sound, she approached a heavy steel door at the end of the corridor. Pressing her ear against it, she could hear faint whispers, barely audible but unmistakably human. Could it be Sophia? Summoning all her courage, Maria tried the handle. To her surprise, it turned. Pushing the door open slowly, she stepped inside. The room was dark, illuminated only by a thin beam of moonlight filtering through a tiny window. In the corner, huddled on the floor, was a figure wrapped in tattered blankets. At first, Maria couldn't make out the person's face, but when the figure lifted their head, her heart nearly stopped. It was Sophia. Her daughter looked thinner, her once bright eyes dulled by exhaustion and suffering. Her uniform was torn and dirty, her hair matted and unkempt. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, recognizing her mother, Sophia gasped, tears streaming down her face. "Mama?" she whispered hoarsely, as if afraid to believe what she was seeing. Maria rushed to her side, pulling Sophia into a tight embrace. "I'm here, mija," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've come to take you home." Sophia clung to her, sobbing uncontrollably. "They told me no one would ever find me," she choked out. "They said I'd disappear forever." "You're not disappearing," Maria said firmly. "Not while I'm still breathing." But their reunion was short-lived. A loud clang echoed down the hallway, followed by the sound of approaching footsteps. Someone was coming. Maria sprang into action, helping Sophia to her feet. "We need to go, now." Together they slipped out of the cell and retraced Maria's steps toward the exit. Moving as quietly as possible, they avoided guards and stayed hidden in the shadows. Sophia stumbled occasionally, weakened by months of captivity, but Maria supported her, refusing to let her fall. Each step brought them closer to freedom, but also closer to danger. Finally, they reached the fence. Maria helped Sophia squeeze through the gap she had created earlier, then followed close behind. As they disappeared into the forest, the distant shouts of alarms erupted from the compound. Guards scrambled, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, but Maria and Sophia were already far ahead, running as fast as their legs could carry them. Reaching a safe distance, they collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Sophia smiled, a fragile but genuine smile. "Thank you, Mama," she whispered. "You saved me." Maria hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "I'll always save you, mija. Always." Though they were safe for now, Maria knew their journey wasn't over. The people who had taken Sophia wouldn't stop hunting them, but for the first time in months, Maria allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. Together, she and Sophia would fight back, not just for themselves, but for everyone who had suffered because of the lies and corruption that had torn their lives apart. Maria and Sophia didn't stop running until they reached a small clearing deep in the forest, far from the facility. The adrenaline that had kept them moving was beginning to wear off, leaving behind exhaustion and raw emotion. Sophia leaned against a tree, her legs trembling beneath her while Maria knelt beside her, brushing strands of dirty hair from her daughter's face. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, as if trying to convince themselves this wasn't a dream. That they were truly together again. "Are you hurt?" Maria asked softly, her voice filled with concern. She inspected Sophia's arms and legs for injuries but found nothing more than cuts and bruises. Still, there was something deeper, a weariness in Sophia's eyes that no amount of rest could heal immediately. Months of captivity had left scars, both visible and invisible. "I'm okay," Sophia whispered, though her voice cracked under the weight of everything unsaid. "But Mama, how did you find me?" Maria hesitated, unsure where to begin. How could she explain the sleepless nights, the desperate search, the risks she had taken? Instead, she simply said, "A mother never gives up on her child. I knew you were alive, Sophia. I felt it in my heart." Sophia's eyes welled up with tears and she reached out to hold her mother's hand. It was a gesture so simple yet so profound. It reminded Maria why she had risked everything. This was her daughter, her reason to keep fighting, no matter how dark things got. But their reunion wasn't just about relief or joy. As the reality of their situation sank in, fear began creeping back into Maria's mind. The people who had taken Sophia weren't ordinary criminals. They were powerful figures who wouldn't hesitate to silence anyone who stood in their way. If they discovered Sophia was still alive, they would come after her, and Maria, again. They needed a plan, and fast. Finding shelter. The first priority was finding somewhere safe to hide. Staying in the forest wasn't an option. It was too exposed, and the cold night air was already biting at their skin. Maria remembered Father Luis mentioning a remote cabin owned by a trusted friend, located miles away from the nearest town. It was isolated enough to offer protection, but close enough to civilization that they wouldn't be completely cut off. With Sophia leaning heavily on her for support, Maria led the way through winding trails and dense foliage. Every step was agonizingly slow, but they couldn't afford to rush. Any noise might alert the guards who were undoubtedly searching for them. Hours passed before they finally reached the cabin, tucked away in a secluded valley surrounded by tall pines. Inside, the space was modest but functional. A wooden table, a couple of chairs, and a small bed covered with a faded quilt. A fireplace sat in the corner, ready to provide warmth once lit. Maria quickly gathered dry wood from outside and started a fire, its crackling flames casting flickering shadows across the room. For the first time in days, they felt a semblance of safety. As Sophia curled up on the bed wrapped in blankets, Maria sat by the fire staring into the flames. Her mind raced with questions. Who exactly were these people? Why had they targeted Sophia? And what secrets had she uncovered that made her such a threat? Maria knew one thing for certain: they couldn't stay hidden forever. Sooner or later, they would have to confront the truth head-on. Uncovering the truth over the next few days, Sophia began to open up about her ordeal. At first, she spoke haltingly, struggling to find the words to describe what she had endured. But as trust grew between them, she revealed pieces of the puzzle that had haunted Maria since the day she received the false news of Sophia's death. It all started during a routine mission, Sophia explained. Her unit had been sent to patrol a conflict zone, but something felt off from the beginning. The orders came directly from high-ranking officials, bypassing standard protocol. Then, during the ambush, things spiraled out of control. While most of the soldiers fell victim to gunfire, Sophia managed to survive. That's when the men in black uniforms arrived, not insurgents, but members of an elite covert unit operating within the military. They pulled me aside, Sophia recounted, her voice barely above a whisper. They told me I had seen too much, that I couldn't go back. They accused me of uncovering evidence of illegal arms deals involving senior officers. I tried to deny it, but they didn't believe me. Maria listened intently, her fists clenched tightly. Illegal arms deals, corruption at the highest levels. The implications were staggering. No wonder they had gone to such lengths to silence Sophia, to stage her death, imprison her, and erase her existence. What kind of evidence? Maria asked gently, sensing Sophia's hesitation. Sophia hesitated before answering. Documents, photos, recordings. Things I stumbled upon accidentally while reviewing intelligence reports. I thought I was doing my duty reporting anomalies to my superiors, but instead of addressing the issue, they turned on me. Maria's heart sank. Her daughter hadn't just been a victim of circumstance. She had become a pawn in a dangerous game of power and deceit. These weren't random acts of violence. They were calculated moves designed to protect those in charge. Deciding to fight back as the days passed, Sophia regained some strength thanks to Maria's care and determination. But neither of them could ignore the looming threat hanging over their heads. Hiding wasn't a permanent solution. Eventually, the people responsible for Sophia's imprisonment would track them down. unless they acted first. "We need to expose them," Sophia said one evening, breaking the silence. Her tone was resolute, almost defiant. "If we don't, they'll continue doing this to others. Innocent people will suffer because of their greed." Maria nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of Sophia's words. Exposing corruption wasn't easy. It required courage, resources, and allies willing to stand against powerful enemies. But Maria also knew they couldn't let fear dictate their lives. They owed it not only to themselves, but to everyone who had been wronged by the system. Father Luis became their first ally. When Maria contacted him discreetly, explaining that Sophia was alive and needed help, he wasted no time in rallying support. He introduced them to a network of journalists and activists dedicated to uncovering government misconduct. One journalist, a seasoned investigator known for his fearless reporting, agreed to meet them secretly in a nearby town. The meeting took place in a dimly lit cafe, away from prying eyes. The journalist listened intently as Sophia recounted her story, occasionally jotting notes in a worn notebook. By the end, his expression was grim but determined. "This is big," he admitted. "Bigger than anything I've worked on before. But if we can gather concrete proof, the documents you mentioned, we can bring them down." Gathering evidence. With the journalist's guidance, Maria and Sophia devised a plan to retrieve the evidence Sophia had hidden before her capture. It was risky, returning to the very place they had escaped, but necessary. The documents were stored in a secure locker at the military base where Sophia had been stationed. Breaking in wouldn't be easy, but they had no choice. Father Luis provided them with disguises and forged IDs, allowing them to blend in among civilians visiting the base. On the appointed day, Maria accompanied Sophia to the entrance, her nerves stretched taut like a bowstring. Guards checked their IDs thoroughly, but the disguises held up and they were granted access. Once inside, Sophia navigated the corridors with practiced ease, leading Maria to the locker room. Her hands trembled as she entered the combination, unlocking the metal compartment. Inside lay a stack of papers, photographs, and digital files, all damning proof of the conspiracy. Sophia stuffed them into a bag, her movements quick but deliberate. Just as they were about to leave, alarms blared throughout the building. Someone must have tipped off security. Panic surged through Maria, but Sophia grabbed her hand firmly. "Don't look back," she urged. "Just run." They sprinted toward the exit, narrowly avoiding patrols as chaos erupted around them. Bullets whizzed past their ears, shattering glass and ricocheting off walls. Adrenaline propelled them forward, driving them to push past the pain and fear. Finally, they burst out into the open air, disappearing into the crowd outside. Maria and Sophia sat in the dimly lit cabin, the fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. The evidence they had risked their lives to retrieve was now safely in the hands of the journalist, who promised to release it to the public within days. But the weight of what they had done and what was yet to come hung heavily over them. They weren't just two people seeking justice anymore. They were symbols of resistance against a corrupt system, and that realization brought both hope and fear. The next morning, Maria woke early, her body stiff from sleeping on the hard wooden floor. She tiptoed outside, careful not to wake Sophia, and stood among the tall pines, breathing in the crisp mountain air. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of peace. The forest around her was quiet, untouched by the chaos of the world beyond. But the calm didn't last long. A distant rumble of engines broke the silence, growing louder with each passing second. Maria's heart sank as she spotted vehicles winding their way up the narrow dirt road leading to the cabin. "They're here," she whispered, rushing back inside. Sophia stirred awake instantly, her instincts sharp despite her exhaustion. "Who?" she asked, though deep down she already knew. "The men who took you," Maria said grimly. "They've found us." Panic surged through Sophia, but years of military training kicked in. She jumped to her feet, grabbing the small bag they had packed for emergencies. Inside were essentials: water, a flashlight, and the knife Father Luis had given Maria. "We can't stay here," Sophia urged. If we do, they'll kill us, or worse. Maria nodded, her mind racing. They couldn't outrun armed guards on foot, but maybe they could outsmart them. The cabin was surrounded by dense woods, offering plenty of cover if they moved quickly. Together, they slipped out the back door, sticking close to the trees as the sound of boots crunching gravel grew closer. A desperate escape. The guards fanned out, shouting orders and shining flashlights into the darkness. Maria and Sophia crouched low, using the underbrush to shield themselves. Every step felt like a gamble, every breath a potential giveaway. Sophia led the way, guiding her mother deeper into the forest, away from the cabin. Her knowledge of terrain and survival tactics became their lifeline. After what felt like hours, they reached a rocky stream cutting through the woods. Sophia stopped abruptly, signaling for Maria to be still. She pointed to the water. "We need to cross here," she whispered. "It'll wash away our tracks." Maria hesitated. The current looked strong, and the rocks slick with moss. One wrong move, and they could slip and injure themselves, or worse, alert their pursuers. But Sophia was right. They had no choice. Taking a deep breath, Maria followed Sophia across the stream, steadying herself against the icy rush of water. On the other side, they climbed uphill, putting as much distance between themselves and the cabin as possible. By dawn, the sounds of pursuit had faded, replaced by the chirping of birds and rustling leaves. Exhausted but alive, Maria and Sophia collapsed beneath a cluster of boulders overlooking a valley below. From their vantage point, they could see smoke rising in the distance, the cabin likely torched by the guards. Maria clenched her fists, anger bubbling beneath her calm exterior. These people wouldn't stop until they were silenced. But Maria refused to let them win. "We'll keep moving," Sophia said firmly, reading her mother's thoughts. "We'll find another safe place, we have to." Maria nodded, determination hardening her features. "We will, and we'll make sure everyone knows the truth." Reaching out for help with nowhere else to turn, Maria and Sophia decided to contact Father Luis again. Using a prepaid phone Sophia had hidden in her bag, they sent him a coded message, a single word: light. It was a signal they had agreed upon earlier, indicating they were in trouble and needed immediate assistance. Father Luis responded almost instantly, arranging for a trusted friend to pick them up at a secluded rendezvous point several miles away. The journey there was grueling, testing their endurance to the limit. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs and fatigue slowed their steps, but neither of them complained. They pushed forward, driven by the promise of safety and revenge. When they finally reached the meeting spot, a crumbling barn tucked away in a forgotten corner of the countryside, they were greeted by an elderly man driving a beat-up truck. He introduced himself simply as a friend of the priest and wasted no time loading them into the vehicle. As they sped away, Maria caught glimpses of Sophia staring out the window, her jaw set with resolve. "Where are we going?" Maria asked after a while, breaking the tense silence. "To a place where you'll be safe," the man replied cryptically, "and where you can plan your next move." Plotting their next move, the safe place turned out to be a modest farmhouse, owned by another ally of Father Luis. Its owner, a kind-hearted woman named Rosa, welcomed them warmly, offering food, clean clothes, and a bed to rest. For the first time in days, Maria and Sophia felt a sense of stability, however fleeting it might be. While they recovered, the journalist kept them updated on his progress. The evidence Sophia had retrieved was explosive: photos of illegal arms, shipments, documents detailing bribes and kickbacks, and recordings of incriminating conversations involving high-ranking officials. Public interest was already building, fueled by whispers spreading online and through underground networks. People were beginning to question the government's integrity, demanding answers. But exposing corruption came with risks. The journalist warned them that powerful figures were scrambling to contain the fallout, threatening anyone involved. "You'll need protection," he told them during a secret call. "Once this story breaks, all hell will break loose." Maria and Sophia understood the stakes. This wasn't just about clearing Sophia's name or bringing justice to those responsible. It was about dismantling a system built on lies and exploitation. And they knew they couldn't do it alone. Building an alliance, with Father Luis's help, Maria and Sophia began reaching out to others who had been affected by the same conspiracy. Families of missing soldiers, whistleblowers silenced by intimidation, and activists fighting for transparency, all came together under one banner. United by shared pain and purpose, they formed a coalition determined to expose the truth. Meetings were held in secret, often late at night in abandoned buildings or remote locations. Each person brought something valuable to the table: information, resources, or connections. Together, they pieced together a bigger picture, revealing how far-reaching the corruption truly was. It wasn't just one unit or one operation. It was systemic, spanning decades and implicating countless individuals. As the days passed, Maria noticed a change in Sophia. The haunted look in her eyes began to fade, replaced by a fierce determination. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was fighting back. And seeing her daughter transform gave Maria strength she hadn't realized she possessed. Facing the storm finally, the day arrived when the journalist published his exposé. Headlines exploded across newspapers and social media platforms, igniting outrage across the nation. Protests erupted in cities and towns, with thousands taking to the streets demanding accountability. Government officials scrambled to deny the allegations, but the evidence was undeniable. For Maria and Sophia, the victory was bittersweet. While they had succeeded in shining a light on the darkness, they also became targets. Death threats poured, forcing them to remain in hiding, but they refused to back down. Sitting together in the farmhouse one evening, watching news reports of the growing movement, Maria turned to Sophia with tears in her eyes. "We did it," she said softly. "We showed them they can't hide forever." Sophia smiled, though sadness lingered in her gaze. "This is just the beginning, Mama. There's still so much work to do." Maria nodded, squeezing her daughter's hand. "Then we'll do it together. No matter what happens, we'll face it head on." And as they sat there, surrounded by uncertainty but bound by love and resilience, they knew they had started something unstoppable. The fight for justice wasn't over, but they had already won the most important battle, proving that even in the face of overwhelming odds, courage and determination could spark change. The days that followed the exposé were a whirlwind of chaos and courage. The story of Sophia's survival, her imprisonment, and the corruption she had uncovered spread like wildfire. People from all walks of life rallied behind Maria and Sophia, their voices growing louder with each passing day. Protesters filled the streets holding signs that read, "Truth over lies," and "Justice for the betrayed." Social media buzzed with hashtags demanding accountability, turning what had started as a personal fight into a national movement. But with the spotlight came danger. Maria and Sophia knew they were living on borrowed time. Powerful people don't fall without a fight, and those implicated in the scandal were pulling every string they could to silence them. Anonymous threats arrived daily. Notes slipped under doors, menacing phone calls, even shadowy figures lurking near their safe house. Yet despite the fear gnawing at her insides, Maria refused to let it consume her. She reminded herself why they were doing this, not just for Sophia, but for everyone who had suffered because of the lies. A mother's resolve, Maria found strength in the smallest moments. One evening, as she sat by the kitchen table peeling potatoes, Sophia walked in, carrying a stack of letters. They were messages of support from strangers. Mothers thanking her for her bravery, soldiers expressing gratitude for exposing the truth, ordinary citizens saying they finally felt heard. Each letter was a reminder that their struggle wasn't in vain. "Look at this one," Sophia said, holding up an envelope. Inside was a drawing made by a child, a stick-figure family standing hand in hand beneath a shining sun. Scrawled across the top were the words, "Thank you for fighting for us." Tears welled up in Maria's eyes as she traced the crayon lines with her fingers. "They're counting on us," she murmured. "We can't give up now." Sophia nodded, her expression softening. "I never thought I'd see this kind of unity. People are waking up, Mama. We've lit a fire and there's no putting it out. Maria smiled faintly, though the weight of responsibility still pressed heavily on her shoulders. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but seeing how their actions had inspired others gave her hope, a fragile but steady flame that kept her moving forward. Confronting the enemy, as public pressure mounted, government officials began scrambling to save face. Some resigned abruptly, while others tried to distance themselves from the scandal. Arrest warrants were issued for key players, including senior military officers and politicians implicated in the arms deals. But not everyone went quietly. Threats escalated, and Maria and Sofia were forced to relocate multiple times to stay ahead of their pursuers. One night, as they prepared to leave yet another safe house, Father Luis arrived unexpectedly. He looked more serious than usual, his brow furrowed with worry. "They know where you are," he said bluntly. "You need to disappear completely." Maria's stomach churned. Disappear? Where would we go? Father Luis hesitated before answering. "There's a network of activists outside the country. They specialize in protecting whistleblowers and victims of state violence. It's risky, but it's your best chance." The idea of leaving everything behind, her home, her memories, her life, felt unbearable. But Maria knew he was right. Staying put meant putting not only herself and Sofia in danger, but also everyone helping them. With a heavy heart, she agreed. A new beginning abroad. The journey out of the country was harrowing. Traveling under fake identities, Maria and Sofia boarded a bus bound for the border, their hearts pounding with every checkpoint they passed. Guards scrutinized their papers, but the forged documents held up, and they crossed into neighboring territory without incident. From there, they connected with members of the activist network, who smuggled them across borders until they reached a small coastal town far from home. Their new life was a stark contrast to the one they had left behind. Living in a modest apartment overlooking the ocean, they adopted new names and routines, blending into the local community as best they could. Maria took odd jobs cleaning houses, while Sofia volunteered at a community center, teaching children basic self-defense skills. Despite the simplicity of their existence, they found peace in anonymity. Yet, even in exile, they remained committed to the cause. Through encrypted channels, they stayed in touch with allies back home, offering guidance and moral support. The movement they had sparked continued to grow, fueled by relentless advocacy and mounting evidence against those in power. Triumph amidst loss. Months later, news broke that several high-ranking officials had been arrested and charged with corruption, conspiracy, and human rights violations. Trials were set to begin, and survivors like Sofia were called upon to testify. Though testifying meant stepping back into the spotlight and facing those who had tried to destroy her, Sofia didn't hesitate. Justice demanded it. Standing in court, Sofia recounted her ordeal with quiet dignity. Her voice trembled at times, but she never wavered. Beside her, Maria listened intently, clutching her daughter's hand tightly. Together, they faced the men who had once wielded unimaginable power over them. Now, stripped of their authority, these men squirmed under the weight of the truth. When the verdict was announced guilty on all counts, the courtroom erupted in cheers. Outside, crowds celebrated, waving flags and chanting slogans. For Maria and Sofia, the moment was bittersweet. Victory had come at a cost: months of fear, separation from loved ones, and scars that would never fully heal. But it had also brought something precious, a sense of closure and vindication. Legacy of courage. Years passed, and the story of Maria and Sofia became legend. Their courage inspired countless others to speak out against injustice, proving that even the most ordinary individuals could spark extraordinary change. Books were written about their struggle, documentaries filmed, songs composed, but for Maria and Sofia, the real reward lay in knowing they had made a difference. On a quiet evening long after the dust had settled, Maria and Sofia stood together, on the beach, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The waves lapped gently at their feet, and the air smelled of salt and freedom. "You did good, Mija," Maria said softly, wrapping an arm around Sophia's shoulders. "You stood tall when the world tried to break you." Sophia smiled, leaning into her mother's embrace. "We both did, Mama. And we'll keep standing as long as there's truth to fight for." In that moment, surrounded by the vastness of the sea and sky, they felt a profound sense of peace. Their battle had been hard fought, but it had also reaffirmed what truly mattered: love, resilience, and the unshakable belief that even in the darkest times light could prevail.